After dating for 5 years, my fiancé told me he wasn't sure about marrying me. Then he joked in front of his friends, "If you were prettier, I'd marry you this morning." His mom called me in tears. Dominic and I have been together for just over 5 years, engaged for the last 8 months. We met through mutual friends at a housewarming party. Just two people hitting it off over a shared hatred of iPays and love for 90s cartoons. Our relationship progressed at a comfortable pace, dating for a year, moving in together after 2, adopting our cat, Beans, at 3, and getting engaged last summer. The proposal wasn't extravagant, just a Saturday morning hike to our favorite lookout point, where he nervously fumbled the ring box out of his pocket. I said yes immediately. We set the date for this October and have been slowly planning everything. Well, mostly me planning, while he nodded along. About 3 months ago, Dominic started making odd comments when we discussed wedding plans. Nothing outright negative, just hesitant. When I showed him potential venues, he'd say things like, "That's a lot of money for just one day," or "Do we really need to invite all those people?" I brushed it off as typical guy behavior or budget concerns. Then came the delayed responses to my texts about wedding stuff. I'd send him options for caterers, and he'd reply hours later with just, "Looks fine," or "Whatever you want." When I asked if everything was okay, he'd say he was just busy at work. His construction company had taken on some significant projects, so I understood. Last month, he started spending more time with his work friend Paul, going out for drinks or watching games at Paul's place. Again, nothing seemed out of the ordinary, just more frequent than before. However, when he came home, he seemed distant, checking his phone often and being less affectionate. I tried discussing my concerns with my best friend Lena. She suggested it might just be pre-wedding jitters and recommended a date night to reconnect. So last Friday, I made reservations at a new Italian restaurant downtown, wore a nice dress, something I hadn't worn in a while, and even bought Dominic's favorite beer to enjoy at home. Unfortunately, the date night was a disaster. He appeared distracted throughout dinner and barely engaged in conversation. When I brought up finalizing our honeymoon plans, he dropped a bombshell. He wasn't sure if he was ready for all of this. Not just the honeymoon, but the wedding and marriage altogether. I was shocked. 5 years together, 8 months engaged, and now he was expressing doubt. When I pressed him for more details, he mentioned conversations with Paul about how marriage changes everything, referencing Paul's brother's messy divorce. The discussion escalated quickly, and I tried to maintain my composure in the restaurant while feeling like my world was falling apart. We barely touched our meals, and the ride home was thick with tension. At our apartment, he avoided further discussion, stating he needed time to think and ended up sleeping on the couch. The next morning was painfully awkward. We moved around each other like strangers in a shared space. He mentioned going to lunch with Paul and some work friends at the Rusty Nail, a local sports bar. I was too emotionally drained to argue, so I let it go. A few hours later, Lena called and encouraged me to get out of the apartment. We went for coffee, and I unloaded everything. Lena listened patiently, suggesting that perhaps Dominic was just experiencing typical pre-wedding anxiety. After coffee, we wandered around Target, my usual go-to for stress relief. I bought some throw pillows and new shampoo, because retail therapy is still therapy, right? By early evening, I felt calmer and decided to head home. Just as I was pulling into our apartment complex, I received a text from Kylar, one of Dominic's co-workers whom I had met at the company Christmas party. He asked if I was okay, mentioning that things had gotten weird at the Rusty Nail. Instead of texting back, I called Kylar. He sounded uncomfortable and initially hesitant to share details, but after some prodding, he finally revealed what had happened. The guys were teasing Dominic about wedding planning, and when Paul asked if he was ready to commit to one woman forever, Dominic expressed doubts about the timing of the wedding. When Paul pressed further, Dominic, who was apparently drunk at the time, made a comment like, "If you were prettier, I'd be more excited about marrying you." He laughed it off, but Kylar told me that some of the guys called Dominic out for that remark. Dominic just got defensive and insisted they couldn't take a joke. I sat in my car for 20 minutes, crying after that call. The man I had loved for 5 years, whom I believed loved me back, had publicly joked that my appearance was the reason he hesitated to marry me. When I finally went inside, Dominic was passed out on the couch, still in his clothes from earlier, and the apartment smelled like stale beer. I took Beans into the bedroom and locked the door. On Sunday morning, I woke up to the smell of coffee and bacon, Dominic's typical apology breakfast. He looked hungover and sheepish, clearly hoping that food would help mend things. When I confronted him about what Kylar had told me, his expression fell. He immediately tried to downplay it, claiming he was drunk and being foolish. According to him, the guys were just teasing him about being tied down, and he had said something stupid to silence them. His defense of guys being guys only made things worse. We argued about how he could humiliate me like that in front of his friends, with him insisting it wasn't his intent. He tried to explain that he was stressed about wedding expenses and pressure, but I couldn't overlook the fact that he had used my appearance as the punchline of a cruel joke. I couldn't stay in the apartment with him. I grabbed my purse and headed to my brother Elliot's place. He has always been my safe harbor during tough times. When I told him what happened, he was furious and ready to confront Dominic directly. I managed to calm him down, explaining that I just needed space and a place to stay while I figured things out. Throughout Sunday, Dominic kept texting me with apologies and pleading for me to come home and talk. I only responded once, saying I needed time. On Monday, I called in sick to work, unable to face answering phones at the dental office while pretending everything was okay. Around 9 a.m. that morning, I received a call from Valerie, Dominic's mom. We've always had a good relationship, and she has been more supportive of us than my own mother, who lives in Florida with her third husband. Valerie sounded upset, saying Dominic had called her the night before, and there was something important I needed to know. She asked if we could meet somewhere to talk, and that's where I am now, sitting in my car outside the coffee shop, wondering what else there could possibly be to know, and if my 5-year relationship is completely over. I never imagined I would be writing this post. I keep glancing at my engagement ring, questioning if I should have seen this coming. Was I blind, or did everything really change so abruptly? Should I hear Valerie out? What could she possibly say that would make any of this okay? First update. Thank you all for the overwhelming support on my original post. I didn't anticipate thousands of comments. I've tried to read as many as I could between crying sessions and stress eating the emergency Oreos from my brother's pantry. For those asking, yes, I met with Valerie, Dominic's mom, and I'll share that at the end of this update. A lot has happened in the last 2 days, and I'm still processing everything. After posting on Monday, I called in sick to work again. My boss was understanding, noting that I had only taken 2 sick days in the past year, and that I sounded terrible on the phone. I spent most of the morning in Elliot's spare room, scrolling through your comments and trying to gather my thoughts. Around noon, Lena came over on her lunch break with sandwiches from a deli near the hospital where she works. I hadn't eaten much since Sunday, so even though I wasn't hungry, I forced myself to take a few bites. Lena gently reminded me that I couldn't avoid Dominic forever. We lived together, had joint accounts, and would eventually need to talk. She was right, of course. I couldn't hide at my brother's place indefinitely, especially since Elliot's girlfriend was coming over for dinner that night. The last thing I wanted was to be the sad third wheel at their taco night. After Lena left, I took a shower, borrowed one of Elliot's hoodies, don't judge, it was comforting, and drove back to my apartment. The whole way there, I rehearsed what I wanted to say. I wasn't going to yell or cry. I was going to stay calm and mature and get answers. When I pulled into our parking spot, I noticed Dominic's truck was there. He should have been at work. My stomach dropped as I walked up the stairs to our second-floor unit. I unlocked the door to find him on the couch in sweats, looking like he hadn't slept at all. Surrounded by wedding planning binders I had put together over the last 8 months, Beans was curled up next to him. The little traitor. He seemed surprised and relieved to see me. When I asked why he wasn't at work, he mentioned he was taking personal time. He had apparently been going through all the wedding plans, trying to understand how he had messed up so badly. I stood by the door, not ready to sit beside him, and told him that reviewing wedding details wouldn't fix what he had said. What followed was a long, challenging conversation. He apologized again for the comment at the bar, calling it inexcusable and claiming he didn't even believe it. When I asked why he would say something he didn't believe, he explained he was trying to look cool in front of his friends, a response that only fueled my anger. I reminded him of his comments during dinner before the bar incident, pointing out that he had expressed doubts about our wedding even when sober. He admitted to feeling stressed about several issues, a work project falling behind schedule, Paul's constant marriage horror stories, and anxiety over our wedding budget. Instead of discussing these concerns with me, he had bottled everything up until it exploded in the worst possible way. As our conversation continued, he revealed something new. Fears about turning into his father. Dominic rarely spoke about his dad, who had left when he was 12 after having an affair and moved to Arizona to start a new family. Although Dominic had always insisted it hadn't affected him much, he now confessed he worried about having a genetic predisposition to cheat or abandon his family. I pointed out that he wasn't his father, and that genetics don't dictate relationship choices. His response was revealing. He wondered if he could really promise forever, when forever seemed so impossible based on what he had witnessed growing up. When I asked if he had discussed these fears with anyone else, he hesitated before admitting he had been talking to Kyler sometimes. Apparently, they had grown closer since Kyler joined the company, and he had gone through some relationship challenges too. This connected to why Kyler had called me about the bar incident. He already knew about Dominic's doubts. The conversation took another difficult turn when I asked exactly what Dominic had been feeling. His answer was painfully honest, scared, overwhelmed, and uncertain about marriage despite loving me. He explained he kept thinking about how his parents had seemed happy until they weren't anymore, fearing he might replicate that situation with us. I pressed him on why he hadn't shared these feelings earlier. He claimed he was afraid I'd think he didn't love me enough. The irony wasn't lost on me. By hiding his fears, he had created the very situation he was trying to avoid. When I questioned whether his joke about my appearance came from genuine unattraction, he insisted he had always found me attractive. He referred to our first meeting at the housewarming party, recalling specific details about my green sweater and his terrible beer pong skills. According to him, the comment stemmed from insecurity and a misguided attempt to appear in control in front of his friends rather than feeling trapped. As we continued our discussion, I asked a crucial question. Were his doubts about marriage in general, or about marrying me specifically? His hesitation told me everything. He finally admitted that while his fears were mostly about marriage and commitment, part of him questioned if we were right for each other long term. This hurt more than the comment about my appearance. After 5 years together, he was still uncertain about our compatibility. When I pressed for specifics, he mentioned how we had both changed since our early 20s. My increased need for planning contrasted with my former spontaneity, and his abandoned dreams of starting his own business. Although I pointed out that growth and change are normal in relationships, he questioned whether we had grown together or apart. At that point, I felt emotionally drained. I told him I needed time away to process everything, his public humiliation, his hidden doubts, and now his uncertainty about our compatibility. He pleaded for us to work through it together, suggesting therapy or couples counseling, but I remained firm about needing space. As I was about to pack more clothes, he mentioned that my phone had been buzzing. I checked and saw 3 missed calls from Valerie. With everything happening, I had completely forgotten about our planned coffee meeting. When I told Dominic this, his expression shifted from confusion to concern. He asked what his mom wanted to discuss, and I explained that she had called crying the previous morning, saying she needed to talk about something important after his Sunday night call to her. His reaction was telling. The color drained from his face, and he avoided making eye contact. When I asked what he had told her, he vaguely mentioned their fight and his doubts, but his evasiveness made me suspicious. When I pressed him further, he insisted it wasn't his place to explain, and suggested I hear whatever it was from his mom directly. I stepped away to call Valerie back. She answered immediately, concerned about my absence for our meeting. I explained that I was at the apartment talking with Dominic. She mentioned having something important to tell me and urged me to meet right away. Her voice sounded strained when I mentioned being with Dominic, further heightening my suspicion that there was something significant I didn't know. After arranging to meet Valerie in 30 minutes, I confronted Dominic again, asking what his mother knew that I didn't. He finally looked up, his expression a mix of guilt and resignation. He admitted there was something he should have told me himself, and suggested I talk to his mom, offering to be gone when I returned if that's what I wanted. I quickly packed enough clothes for a week, along with toiletries and my laptop. At the door, Dominic told me he loved me, but I responded that sometimes love isn't enough. On my way to meet Valerie, Dominic's sister, Karina, called. She was clearly concerned, asking what was happening between Dominic and me. She mentioned hearing from Paul about the bar incident and noted that Dominic wasn't answering her texts while their mom seemed upset. When I explained I was heading to meet Valerie, Karina sounded surprised and asked if the meeting was about Maria. The name hit me like a ton of bricks. What about Maria? I asked. Karina's shocked reaction and quick backtracking told me she had accidentally revealed something important. She apologized and urged me to hear Valerie out, refusing to explain further despite my pressing questions. As I pulled into the coffee shop parking lot, I felt a mix of dread and anticipation. Second update. Thank you all for the support on my previous posts. Reading your comments has been both comforting and overwhelming. I haven't been able to respond to many, but please know I've read them and appreciate the advice. I'm writing this from a new location, Lena's apartment. After meeting with Valerie yesterday, I couldn't face going back to Elliot's or our apartment. Lena has a pull-out couch that's slightly more comfortable than Elliot's storage room futon. Plus, her cat, Pepper, doesn't judge me for crying into my cereal at 2 a.m. So, the meeting with Valerie? Where do I even start? The coffee shop was busy for a Tuesday afternoon. Some local community college had just let out, and students with laptops occupied most tables. Valerie had managed to snag a corner booth, the kind with high backs that create at least an illusion of privacy. She looked different than the last time I had seen her at our monthly family dinner 3 weeks ago. Her usually perfect bob was slightly disheveled, and she wasn't wearing any makeup. In the 5 years I've known her, I had never seen Valerie without at least mascara and lipstick. She's not vain, it's just her routine, like how some people can't start their day without coffee. When I arrived, she stood to hug me, smelling of those lavender dryer sheets she always uses. I ordered a black coffee, even though what I really wanted was one of those sugary caramel drinks with extra whipped cream. Somehow it felt wrong to order something frivolous for this conversation. After some awkward small talk, Valerie got straight to the point. Dominic had called her Sunday night in a complete emotional meltdown. While she acknowledged his fears about commitment and turning into his father were valid, there was something much more immediate causing his behavior. Maria. I nearly choked on my coffee. Maria? The new project coordinator at Dominic's company. The woman he'd mentioned a few times in passing. As Valerie explained, nervously shredding a napkin into tiny pieces, Dominic had developed feelings for Maria over the past few months. Nothing physical had happened, at least according to what Dominic told his mother. However, there was an emotional connection that had him questioning everything about our relationship. I sat there trying to process this information, feeling like the coffee shop was tilting sideways. While Valerie continued talking, I was mentally connecting dots, building a timeline. Maria had started at Dominic's company around New Year's, and I had met her briefly at the company holiday party in March. By then, Dominic had already been acting differently, more distant, constantly checking his phone and spending more time with work friends. What I had initially written off as stress from his big project now seemed like something entirely different. When I asked Valerie why she was telling me this, instead of protecting her son, her eyes filled with tears. The parallel to her own marriage breakdown became evident as she shared more details. Before Dominic's father left for Arizona with his coworker, there had been months of distance, hurtful comments, and manufactured arguments, all designed to create separation rather than admit the truth. She didn't want to see history repeat itself, leaving me in the dark while Dominic took the coward's way out. The comment at the bar suddenly made more sense. Not just drunken foolishness, but a subconscious attempt to sabotage our relationship so he wouldn't have to make the difficult choice himself. We talked for over an hour. Valerie shared more about her own experiences, how she had tried to save her marriage even after learning about the affair, and how she had blamed herself for not being enough. Before we parted ways in the parking lot, she said something that has echoed in my mind ever since. The hardest lesson I learned was that you can't make someone choose you. They either do or they don't, and anything in between is just delaying the inevitable. I sat in my car for a long time afterward, staring at my phone. There were 3 new texts from Dominic, all variations of "I'm sorry" and "I love you," but not a single mention of Maria. He was still hiding the full truth. Instead of responding, I called Lena and asked if I could crash at her place. She didn't hesitate or ask questions. She just said she was already making up the pull-out couch and offered to pick up dinner on her way home. That's the kind of friend everyone deserves during a crisis. I finally texted Dominic back, "I know about Maria. Don't contact me again until you're ready to tell me the complete truth. I'll be collecting more of my things tomorrow while you're at work." Then I blocked his number, not permanently, just for the night. I needed space to think without his explanations or justifications. On the drive to Lena's, Karina called, Our conversation confirmed what Valerie had told me and added another layer. She had overheard Dominic and Paul discussing the situation last Thursday. She confronted her brother and made him promise to be honest with me after the weekend. Clearly, he had failed to keep that promise. What surprised me most was Karina's unwavering support. Despite being Dominic's sister, she made it clear she was on my side. The relief I felt was enormous. I had been worried about losing not just Dominic, but his entire family, who had become my family over the years. Lena's apartment was exactly what I needed that night. A neutral space where I could just exist without having to explain myself. We ate Thai food on her living room floor, with her coffee table covered in papers from her online class. While watching a baking competition, we neither really followed. The mundane normality of it felt like a life preserver amidst my emotional storm. After Lena went to bed, I stayed up scrolling through photos on my phone. 5 years of memories with Dominic. Vacations, holidays, random selfies on ordinary days. Our engagement photos showed us grinning like we'd won the lottery. I was making mental plans for the next day. Going to the apartment while Dominic was at work, packing more things, and maybe talking to the landlord about breaking our lease, when my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Margot, this is Maria. I know you blocked Dominic. Can we meet tomorrow? There's more to the story that you should know. Just the two of us." I stared at the message for a long time, my heart pounding. What more could there possibly be? And why would this woman want to tell me directly? After what felt like an hour but was probably only minutes, I typed a response. Where and when? Third update. First, thank you all for the overwhelming support on my previous posts. I've been reading your comments during sleepless nights, and they've helped more than you know. For those asking how I'm doing, I'm surviving. Some moments are easier than others. The meeting with Maria happened, and it went nothing like I expected. We met at a little breakfast place near the park, neutral territory, I guess. When I arrived, she was already there, nervously scrolling through her phone. She looked different than I remembered from the company party, less polished, more human somehow. Her hair was pulled back in a messy bun, and she wore minimal makeup. What surprised me immediately was how uncomfortable she seemed. If Maria had been having a secret emotional affair with my fiancé, shouldn't she have been more confident? Instead, she kept fidgeting with her coffee cup and avoiding eye contact. Our conversation revealed two major bombshells. First, Maria had no idea Dominic had developed feelings for her until Paul mentioned it casually last week. According to her, she and Dominic had worked closely on a project, occasionally texting about work after hours, but nothing that crossed any lines from her perspective. She had never flirted with him or encouraged anything beyond friendship. She even showed me their text history, which was mostly work-related, with occasional memes, but nothing romantic or inappropriate. Maria also had a boyfriend of 3 years who sometimes joined their group for happy hours. The second revelation was about Paul. Apparently, he had been deliberately stirring the pot. Maria had overheard him at work encouraging Dominic to explore his options before settling down, specifically mentioning her as someone who understood him better than I did. She explained that Paul had been telling everyone at work Dominic was having cold feet about the wedding, making jokes about him being trapped and missing out on his freedom. By the end of our meeting, I felt strangely calm. Maria wasn't the villain I had imagined. She was just a bystander caught in Paul's manipulation and Dominic's weakness. Before we parted ways, she said something that resonated with me. "You seem like someone who knows their worth. Don't let anyone make you question it." I left that meeting with a new perspective and a plan. This wasn't just about Dominic and me anymore. It was about Paul's toxic influence, Dominic's family history, and where I fit into all of it. I texted Karina afterward, asking if she could help arrange a family meeting at her apartment, neutral territory since I wasn't ready to be alone with Dominic yet. She agreed immediately. That brings me to yesterday's dinner. Karina had set everything up in her small but cozy apartment. She ordered food from that Italian place near her building. Nothing fancy, just pasta and salad. Valerie arrived first, then Paul. Karina had insisted he attend. And finally Dominic, who looked like he hadn't slept in days. The first 20 minutes were excruciating. We all sat around Karina's dining table, pushing pasta around our plates, making awkward small talk about the weather and Karina's new coffee table. The elephant in the room was practically stealing food off our plates, but no one wanted to be the first to acknowledge it. Finally, Valerie broke the silence, stating bluntly that we weren't there for a social gathering, but to address what had been happening and find a way forward. That opened the floodgates. I shared what I had learned from Maria, carefully watching Paul's face as I spoke. The way his expression shifted from confusion to defensiveness told me everything. He tried to interrupt, claiming he was just looking out for his friend, but Karina shut him down immediately. Dominic mostly sat in silence, staring at his barely touched pasta. When directly addressed, he admitted that Maria had just been friendly, but he had built it into something more because he was scared of turning into his dad. Valerie visibly flinched at that comment. When I brought up the joke at the bar, Dominic looked genuinely ashamed. He admitted it had nothing to do with Maria, it was just him being a coward. Paul had been giving him a hard time about being whipped, and instead of standing up for our relationship, he had said something horrible to seem cool. According to Dominic, it was never about my looks. Paul tried to dismiss it all as just guy talk, but Karina reminded everyone that Dominic and I were supposed to get married in 3 months. That simple statement, a reminder of our rapidly approaching wedding date, hit me like a physical blow. The save the dates had gone out, deposits had been paid, and my dress was hanging in Lena's spare closet, waiting for final alterations. That's when I quietly said I didn't think the wedding was happening anymore. The room fell silent. Dominic started to protest, but I cut him off. I explained how I had spent the last week trying to understand how we got here. What I realized was that this wasn't just about Maria, that joke, or even Paul's toxic influence. This was about Dominic not being honest, with me or himself. I told them how I had ignored the signs for months, his disinterest in wedding planning, his increased time with Paul, his emotional distance. I had made excuses because it was easier than confronting the truth, but I deserved someone who was certain about me, someone who didn't need a family intervention to figure out their feelings. Paul made a snarky comment about me being dramatic, which earned him simultaneous shut-up responses from both Valerie and Karina. Dominic insisted he was certain about loving me, just scared of messing everything up. I pointed out that he already had. The conversation continued for hours, filled with tears, heated words, especially between Karina and Paul, and difficult truths. We rehashed old wounds and uncovered new ones. Around midnight, when everyone was emotionally exhausted, we reached the inevitable conclusion. The wedding was off. Our 5-year relationship had run its course. It wasn't a screaming match or a dramatic exit. It was a mutual recognition that something fundamental had broken between us. Trust. Maybe it could be rebuilt eventually, but not in time for an October wedding. Not with Maria still working at Dominic's company, and not with the echo of that joke still lingering between us. Karina drove me back to Lena's place afterward, assuring me that this didn't change my relationship with her or Valerie. According to her, I was still family to them, regardless of what happened with Dominic. When I got back to Lena's apartment, I sat on the pull-out couch in the dark, letting the reality wash over me. 5 years, gone, wedding, canceled, future unknown. I didn't cry right away. Instead, I made a list in the Notes app on my phone. Call venue to cancel, deposit probably gone. Return ring, contact guests, move out of apartment change, relationship status on social media. It was past 2 a.m. when Lena shuffled out from her bedroom. She'd heard me come in and wanted to check if I was okay. When I told her the wedding was off, she simply sat beside me on the pullout and put her arm around my shoulders. We sat like that until sunrise, not saying much, just existing in the strangeness of my new reality. This morning, I woke up to a text from Dominic, asking if we could meet to discuss practical matters, the apartment lease, separating our finances, and what to do with the furniture we bought together. So, adult, so final. I also had a message from Elliot asking when he should come over to help pack my things, my brother, always practical, and one from my mom, who had somehow heard through the grapevine, probably from one of my cousins who follows Karina on Instagram, wanting to know if she should cancel her flight for the wedding. The ring felt heavy on my finger now. I had been twisting it absently, a nervous habit I hadn't realized I had. It was a simple design, a round diamond in a white gold setting, nothing flashy or elaborate. Dominic had chosen it because it was classic, like our relationship. The irony wasn't lost on me. I called the venue this morning. The coordinator was sympathetic but firm. The deposit was non-refundable this close to the date. $8,000 down the drain. Money we'd saved for over a year by cutting back on vacations, new clothes, and dinners out. The practical side of me winced at the waste, but the emotional side didn't care about money right now. Karina texted that she'd found a photographer who might be willing to transfer our deposit to another event in the future. Valerie offered to help contact family members about the cancellation to spare me the awkward conversations. Small kindnesses in the aftermath. Paul unsurprisingly sent a non-apology text about how these things happen for a reason, and how I'd eventually find someone better suited. I deleted it without responding. Maria sent a short message expressing her regret about the situation and assuring me again that nothing happened between them. I strangely believed her. She seemed like collateral damage in this mess, a convenient projection for Dominic's fears and Paul's manipulation. The hardest part was the mundane reminders. The wedding planning binder still sitting in my tote bag, the shared Spotify playlist we'd been building for the reception, the honeymoon research folder on my laptop. Little pieces of a future that no longer existed. Lena suggested I take a mental health day from work, but I decided to go in. Sitting at home, scrolling through Reddit and overthinking everything seemed worse than the distraction of answering phones and filing insurance claims. My coworkers were mercifully normal. Either they didn't know yet, or they were politely pretending not to notice my puffy eyes and absent engagement ring. I'm meeting Dominic tomorrow at a coffee shop to exchange keys and discuss the apartment. He's agreed to move out since my name is on the lease, and he'll be staying with his cousin temporarily. Another practical conversation in the business of dismantling a relationship. Part of me still can't believe this is happening. Last month we were debating reception songs and testing cake flavors. Now we're dividing up kitchen appliances and deciding who keeps the PlayStation. I keep thinking about something Valerie said at the dinner. Endings are rarely clean or perfect. Most of the time, they're messy, sad, and complicated. She would know. She rebuilt her life after Dominic's father left, raising 2 kids alone and eventually finding happiness again. Looking at her now, you'd never guess she went through something so painful. Maybe there's hope in that. For now, I'm taking it one day at a time. Tomorrow I'll handle the apartment and finances. Next week, I'll start looking for my own place. The future beyond that is blurry, but it exists. Karina just texted to ask if I want to meet for coffee this weekend. She mentioned that her family friend Kenzo, an older gentleman who's known their family forever, offered his vacation cabin if I need a getaway to clear my head. The support from Dominic's family is unexpected but deeply appreciated. I haven't decided if I'll take Kenzo up on his offer. Part of me wants to escape somewhere quiet to process everything, while another part knows I need my support system right now. Lena with her practical compassion, Elliot with his protective big brother energy, and even Valerie and Karina with their complicated loyalty. What I do know is that I won't be checking my wedding countdown app anymore, won't be pinning reception decor ideas, or practicing a new signature with Dominic's last name. That future is gone, and while I don't know what comes next, I'm starting to believe there will be something. Last update. It feels strange to be writing this final update from my new apartment. It's been 3 months since the family dinner that ended my engagement. 3 months of piecing my life back together in ways I never expected. Some of you have sent messages asking for an update, so here it is. The good, the bad, and the unexpected. First, the practical stuff. Dominic moved out of our shared apartment within a week of our breakup. Elliot and Lena helped me pack up his things while he was at work, leaving them neatly labeled in the living room for him to collect. It was surreal, separating 5 years of shared existence into his and mine. The coffee maker he'd gotten for his birthday, the throw blanket I'd bought on our weekend trip to that little mountain town, the frame photos we'd hung on every wall. It all felt hollow afterward, like a stage set rather than a home. I lasted 2 more weeks there before the lease manager agreed to let me break the contract with an extra month's payment. It was worth the money to escape the ghost of our relationship that lingered in every room. Finding a new place was harder than expected. The rental market is brutal right now, and my budget as a single person is considerably tighter. I ended up in a smaller 1-bedroom across town, further from work, but with a tiny balcony where I've started growing herbs in dollar store pots. The basil keeps dying, but the mint is thriving against all odds. I choose to see that as symbolic. Financially, it's been an adjustment. Our shared expenses are suddenly all on me. Car insurance, streaming services, even groceries seem more expensive when you're cooking for one. I've become that person who uses coupons, buys store brands, tracks expenses in a spreadsheet, and thinks twice before ordering takeout. Growing up stuff I never thought I'd have to learn at 29. The wedding vendors were surprisingly understanding. The venue kept our deposit but sent a kind note hoping I'd find happiness. The florist refunded half our payment despite their no refund policy. The DJ recommended his brother, who works at a therapy center, an unexpected but thoughtful gesture. The engagement ring sits in my dresser drawer in its original box. Dominic said I should keep it or sell it, that it was bad karma for him to take it back. I haven't decided what to do with it yet. Some days I forget it's there. Other days, I open the box and stare at it, wondering how something so small could have represented such big promises. Social media was its own special hell. I waited 2 weeks before changing my relationship status, dreading the flood of questions. When I finally did it at 2 a.m. on a Tuesday, the notifications poured in anyway. Well-meaning friends sent, "What happened?" Messages, distant relatives offered prayers, and former classmates I hadn't spoken to in years suddenly slid into my DMs with faux concern that felt more like curiosity. I posted a brief, vague statement about mutual decisions and requested privacy, then muted notifications and tossed my phone across the couch. Later, I shared a single photo of my new apartment keys with the caption, "New Beginnings." It received fewer likes than my engagement announcement, but felt more genuine somehow. Now, about Dominic. We've spoken a handful of times since the breakup, mostly about practical matters, mail that came to the wrong address, the shared cloud storage account we forgot to separate, returning a borrowed air fryer to his sister. Each conversation has been civil but strained, like acquaintances forced to make small talk in an elevator. He's still working at the same company and still friends with Paul, though Karina tells me they've had some falling out recently. He's also living at his cousin's place. According to the grapevine, aka Karina, the situation with Maria got awkward after our breakup. She requested a transfer to a different team and has been cold toward him since learning the full story. The biggest surprise came last month when Dominic texted asking if we could meet. We hadn't seen each other face to face since the key exchange at the apartment, and part of me was curious about what he wanted. We met at a coffee shop near my new place, neutral territory with plenty of witnesses, as Lena half-jokingly suggested. He looked different, thinner, with darker circles under his eyes, wearing a shirt I didn't recognize. The first 10 minutes were stilted small talk about work and the weather. Then he pulled out a journal. "I've been seeing someone," he said. My heart did a weird little stutter before he clarified. "A therapist, I mean." The journal was part of his therapy, daily reflections on patterns and behaviors he wanted to change. He'd been examining his relationship with his father, his friendship with Paul, and the way he'd treated me. He didn't ask for forgiveness or reconciliation. He just wanted me to know he was working on himself. "I should have done this years ago," he admitted. "Maybe things would have been different." It was the most self-aware I'd ever seen him, and I found myself genuinely hoping therapy would help him. Not for my sake, that ship has sailed, but because carrying around that much unresolved family trauma seemed exhausting. Before we parted ways, he mentioned he'd heard I was still close with his mom and sister. "I'm glad," he said. "They need good people in their lives." That's been one of the strangest parts of this breakup, maintaining relationships with Dominic's family while disconnecting from him. Valerie texts me weekly, usually sending funny memes or updates about her garden. Karina and I have breakfast every other Sunday at a little diner halfway between our apartments. They've been careful not to put me in uncomfortable positions or share too much about Dominic, respecting the boundaries I've set. As for me personally, I'd like to say I've had some profound awakening, that I've found myself through this heartbreak. The reality is messier. Some days I feel liberated, relieved that I didn't marry someone who could hurt me so carelessly. Other days, usually when my hot water heater acts up, or I can't reach something on the top shelf that Dominic would have grabbed for me, I miss the practical comforts of partnership. I've started therapy too, not specifically because of the breakup, but because it made me realize how much I'd compromised myself in that relationship, how many red flags I'd ignored because they came wrapped in the comfort of familiarity. My therapist suggested I reclaim some parts of myself that got lost along the way. I've resumed hiking on Saturday mornings, something I'd stopped doing because Dominic always complained about early wake-ups on weekends. Dating again feels like a distant concept, though my colleagues have started making noises about setting me up with this great guy they know. I'm not ready. Maybe in a few more months, maybe longer. Right now, I'm still learning how to be comfortable in my own company. The most unexpected development came from what should have been the saddest task: canceling our honeymoon. We'd booked a 10-day trip to the coast, renting a little cottage with a deck overlooking the water. Non-refundable, of course. For weeks I ignored the reminder in my calendar, unable to face losing that deposit too. Then Lena suggested something radical. Take the trip anyway. By myself. You've never traveled alone, she pointed out. Maybe it's time. The idea terrified me at first. 10 days alone in a romantic cottage meant for two? It sounded like the setup for a sad indie film. But the more I thought about it, the more appealing the idea became. I could wake up when I wanted, explore without compromising, and read an entire book in one sitting, if I felt like it. So, that's where I'm headed next week, a honeymoon cottage, solo. I've packed 3 paperbacks, downloaded some podcasts, and splurged on a new swimsuit that I chose entirely for comfort, rather than for how it looked to someone else. My mom thinks I'm crazy. Elliot offered to come with me for part of the time, but I declined. Karina suggested I download a dating app just to see who's out there. Maybe, but probably not. I don't know what I'll find on this non-honeymoon honeymoon. Maybe clarity, maybe more questions. Definitely some sunburn, knowing my luck with sunscreen. The other day I was grocery shopping when our song came on over the store speakers. 3 months ago, it would have sent me hiding in the frozen food section, fighting back tears. This time, I felt just a slight twinge, like pressing on a bruise that's mostly healed. Progress, not perfection. I'm not going to pretend I've got everything figured out. My new apartment's shower has mysterious temperature fluctuations, and I killed another basil plant yesterday. I still occasionally grab my phone to text Dominic about something funny before remembering we don't do that anymore.